All right, let's do this. So, welcome to MASSCreative's final virtual and policy and action update for the month of August. I'm Emily Ruddick, and I am here with Selassie, Ian, and Simone. We are Team MASSCreative, and we are delighted to share some updates with you today. So, let's get started. There we go. So you'll notice that for the first time ever, I think I have a combined federal and state slide. That has to do with the fact that we are just in a moment where we are in August recess. So that means that we're not seeing a lot of legislation move either in Congress or the state legislature. This is frustrating, right? We know that our sector is hurting now, that people who work in the creative communities are in a lot of financial pain, and that's causing a lot of emotional pain. And that's not easy to see things not moving in Congress or not moving on the state level. And so I want to recognize that. And I want to let you know that just because we're not seeing things moving, it doesn't mean that we don't have ways to take action. And it doesn't mean that we're not working and pressing and urging that there be protections and relief for the creative sector. So what's really happening right now during August recess? So I'm sure some of you have been following the coverage of the DNC National Convention that ended last night. And then the GOP's convention starts next week. So we're seeing a lot of focus and attention there. We're also seeing that there are a lot of political campaigns that are on the campaign trail, both on the municipal, state, and federal level. And so I want to just sort of share with you some actions you can take around this. So the first one is that the bills and the acts that we are still supporting still exist, and still legislators, even though they may not be casting votes, are still working and working with their staff in their offices. And so we may need to make sure that these issues are still live for them. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and join in support of the Save Our Stages and Restart Acts. Those are two bills, federal bills that we are supporting, then that actually deliver a lot of protection and relief to venues that have been, and for-profit and nonprofit venues that have been impacted by closures. Then the next piece is that economic development bond bill, which we spent a lot of time talking about in July, that's in conference committee where they're reconciling the differences between the House and the Senate versions. We want to make sure that all $31 million that was authorized for spending to protect and relieve the cultural sector is included in the final version, as is a relief commission to study and make recommendations for more ways to help our sector out right now. We want to make sure that that is all included. The other thing, and Selassie just popped it into the chat, and there were a couple of questions about this from registration, is what is happening with the Mass Cultural Council's fiscal year 21 budget? Well, there is a great piece that Beth Ann Steiner, the Director of External Relations for the Mass Cultural Council, wrote that you can link to, and you can sort of take a look and sort of see how the delay in a full fiscal year 21 state budget is impacting the Mass Cultural Council in terms of being able to set up grant programs for fiscal year 21. But I want to be clear, it doesn't mean there will not be a budget for fiscal year 21. There will be, and we expect that when the state legislature kind of comes back into formal sessions, starting in September, that this is going to be a big push, right? We know they have a 3-month extension budget that gets through October 31st. So September and October are going to be really focused on that state budget, and we're going to be right there with the Mass Cultural Council and all of you, urging that there be that the Mass Cultural Council budgets and the public investment in arts and culture in Massachusetts spending is protected, right? So that is going to happen. Do not worry. So the other thing that I've sort of noted here is actions you can take on the campaign trail. So how many of you, give me a show of hands or a +1 in the chat box, have received a text or a call from a campaign volunteer urging and asking you where you stand on voting for their candidate? I have. Yep. So I have become, I feel badly, probably that volunteer's worst nightmare, because the first question I ask is, what's your candidate's arts and cultural platform? And almost every time the answer is, I'll have to get back to you. And then I follow up with, how does your candidate see arts and culture playing a role in advancing their top campaign priorities? And then the next text I write is, artists and creatives vote. How are you addressing the crisis our sector is facing? The more questions like this that a campaign receives, the more pressure and the more likelihood there is that they will, in fact, have to answer those questions and develop those policy priorities around arts and culture. So I would encourage every single one of you, you don't have to be rude. I'm not rude. In fact, most of the time when I get a call, I say, I'm so glad you're working to support democracy and strengthen democracy. Let's have a chat. And they always say, like, you're the first person who didn't hang up on me. And then we talk about arts and culture, right? So you can tell your story to a campaign worker or a candidate. You could ask these questions. This is another way that we can make sure that our issues are staying top of mind, right? So feel free to take what you like out of that and leave the rest on the side. Okay, so moving on, I am going to talk about arts education. So many of you are probably following how schools and school districts are putting together their reopening plans. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education actually had a deadline of last Friday for schools to submit their reopening plans. And I saw a piece yesterday in State House News Service that 70% of schools are planning to reopen in person. We know that this is a really difficult decision. And we know that and at the top of mind for us and for the other members of the Arts for All Coalition, safety and care of both students and teachers and workers in schools is the top priority. We also want to make sure that every student in Massachusetts still has access to quality in-school arts education. And there's been some of the recommendations that we've seen coming from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are really sort of confusing superintendents and principals about what they can and can't allow to happen in their schools. So there was this great study that was just released. It's from the International Coalition of Performing Arts Aerosol Study Round 2 that gives some really smart, science-based and medical-based recommendations about how you can, in a school, do band, orchestra, singing, choral, and performance, and then theater performance safely for both students and staff. And we're really, we're actually writing a letter to the Commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to urge him and his colleagues to read the study and incorporate it into updated guidance to ensure that young people have access to these core arts education curriculum components. The other thing that we are doing in partnership with Arts for All is we have the MA Arts Education Programs Monitor. So this is a system that we're using to just sort of track and see if a school or school district announced that they're going to cut their arts education programs. We want to know that, and we want to be able to sort of keep a little dashboard of that information so that we can connect advocates to resources and make sure that we are monitoring and making sure that the amount of quality arts education in schools is protected right now when it's most at danger. So Ann Wicks asks in the chat, what about quality remote arts education? Yep, that's a really good point, right? So we are pushing for that as well. We know that one of the things that we've been pushing from the beginning is making sure that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education underlines the importance of arts education right now. And, you know, we have superintendents who already get this, right? And school department leaders who understand that arts education for many young people is a way that they are continuing to hang on and stay connected to their school communities, whether it's in person or remote, and that this is going to be a really important component of social and emotional learning right now. And so we're continuing to advocate for that as well. I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about municipal advocacy work. So as you know, MASSCreative is a statewide arts and culture advocacy organization. And our sort of like our key spot is right at the state level, but that doesn't mean we aren't supporting and encouraging and wanting to help and engage on local level. So A couple of weeks ago, arts and culture leaders in Somerville asked me to attend a meeting that they were having because they were really sort of they were concerned about how the city was going to help and protect the arts and cultural community, which has been sort of a pride of Somerville for a couple of decades. And so they had created a letter of requests with 5 requests about ways that the mayor and the city council and the arts council could protect the creative sector in Somerville. They sent that to the mayor, and then they asked if MASSCreative would support a petition on our website to collect signatures in support of that letter. I am so excited to tell you that thanks to the hard work of these arts advocates and leaders, we have over 500 signatures. We're closing that petition today and packaging it up, and we'll send it to the mayor, city council, and the arts council either later today or Monday. But this is how we are supporting and hoping to hold room for local advocates, arts advocates leadership, right? So I also was asked by the city by arts leaders in the city of Cambridge to support some work, and we are in the works of putting together a petition for them too. So right now on the screen in this recording, if any other local arts activists or leaders are interested in hosting a petition on our site, we are happy to do so. Part of the partnership is like that we share the data that's collected with you all so that you as coalition leaders can follow up and continue to build that local advocacy effort, because when those local advocacy efforts are strong, the state advocacy efforts are even stronger. So we're really excited and so glad to have all of you in that mix. Next, let's talk about some Create the Vote items. So we create the vote by taking the census. 2 weeks ago, I shared the disappointing news that the administration has actually lopped off a month of the census. So it was supposed to end on October 31st. It is now ending on September 30th. And so our concern is that that loss of a month will mean a loss of representation by folks being able to take the census in Massachusetts. I also shared with you a little map in this county by county comparison of self-response rates. We've actually improved overall as a state by 1 percentage point. So yay, go us. I like to think that our collective work had a little bit to do with that. If you haven't already taken the census, please take the census. We also have included in the chat box some links to a toolkit about the census and some info about the census. We actually have an infographic in both English and Spanish that we would encourage you to share that sort of help give some top line FAQs around why it's important to take the census and what it does. A not so fun fact is that due to the last census, which was a decade ago, Massachusetts actually lost a seat in Congress. So the census impacts how federal funds are allocated and how legislative and congressional districts are made. And so we want to make sure we don't lose representation in Congress, as well as representation in the state. Okay, so then moving on, let's talk a little bit about the Create the Vote elections. So I want to draw your attention to this graphic that sits right next to the Create the Vote logo. It was created by Michelle Collado. She is a youth leader and artist working with Elevated Thought in Lawrence. And Elevated Thought, which is a steering committee member of the Create the Vote campaign, is working with their youth leaders to do a lot of research about voter disenfranchisement and to create art that speaks to that. And so thanks to Elevated Thought and the Essex Community Foundation's Creative Counties initiative, they actually commissioned 2 pieces, Michelle's and then another artist. And you can find those images and those graphics on our website. They're included in our Create the Vote graphics toolkits. So here are a couple of really important upcoming voting reminders. Frankly, top of the list for me, right, is that the primary election is September 1st. And we know that there's a really strong, we're pushing mail-in ballots. The deadline to get your application for a mail-in ballot is August 26th. At this point, I would highly encourage, if you have not submitted your application, to walk it to your local elections office instead of putting it in the mail. It's not that I don't trust the post office. We are concerned that there's just going to be too much of a delay in getting that into the local elections office and getting you your mail-in ballot. So tighten up that process. The other thing I want to remind folks is that there is an early voting period in Massachusetts, so you don't have to wait until September 1st to go in person. There's a link in the chat box that'll show you where you can get your information about your local voting early voting period to your locality. And then the other things that I want to talk about is that there are a couple different ways you can create the vote. So please take our Create the Vote pledge, right? Join us every other week. You'll receive an action email that gives you some key practical ways that you can work to create the vote within your organization or within your communities. You can also be a census or poll worker. And we have an article that was written by the Create the Vote Steering Committee about how you can do that and why it's so important right now. And then this is a question that Simone has been asking, and I really love it, is who are your 5? So who are the 5 people in your life, in your community, in your network that you're going to talk to today or next week, engage and let them and share these resources and encourage them to participate in our primary election and then our general election. So that is what I've got for today. Our next policy and action update webinar will be Friday, September 4th. So we're every other week. I just also want to, as a little footnote, say that a couple of weeks ago on Boston Radio, there was a piece around there was some coverage around the impact of COVID to the arts and cultural sector and specifically venues. And during that call, a number of folks called in, including Roxy from the Puppet Showplace Theater and Jason McCool, who is an artist and a producer in Boston and also a member of MASSCreative's Leadership Council. And the talking points about why our sector matters, how we are making a difference in our communities, and the needs, our specific needs, were so clear during that conversation. I just want to lift up and thank those folks who called in. That is, again, another way that we are continuing to tell our story and make sure that the general public and our elected officials understand how important it is to protect our sector right now until we're able to fully reopen. Yes, Eva Rosenberg called in too with a really great comment. The other thing, and I cannot believe I forgot this, so I just want to go back to the top. It's in the chat box. Maybe Celeste, you can include it again. I want to point your attention to the Cultural New Deal. This is a really important document that talks about how, as we are moving through this crisis into recovery and then reimagination, we have an opportunity as a sector to rethink equity and racial and economic justice in our field. And this Cultural New Deal proposes some really important policies that we as a field can take, and then we can think about in terms of our advocacy. So I want to make sure you all know about that. This sort of is a theme that rides through all of our work, is how are we making sure that public investment means that everyone has access to creative experiences and cultural participation. And that is why we exist, to do our work. So I am so glad to have you all with us. Thank you so much for my 2 postscripts. Please join us in 2 weeks. Have a good weekend. Get a little time outside. Thanks so much.